Good morning, YouTube. Happy Thursday. I hope you had a wonderful week with your students. I'm in early this morning because I have to record a video for my AP students. We're in our chapter on equilibrium, so I have to do a video on how to solve equilibrium problems. So I'm going to do that. Fortunately, I do have first period prep today, so I can get ready for AP and CP. My CP kids, they have a test on intermolecular forces, so I have to make sure that their review is copied and ready to go. But this video really isn't about what I'm doing with my students necessarily. It's more general about how I use do-nows in the classroom. You may call them do-nows, you may call them bell work, bell ringers. There's a ton of different variations. But before I do that, guys, you know me, I have to get ready and I have to get going for the day. But I probably won't be able to check in with you until after school today because I do have lab with the AP class. So I'm gonna try, maybe I'll try to check in with you guys during lunch, but either way, I'll definitely talk to you guys a little bit later. Welcome back, chemists. In this video, we'll focus on problem-solving strategies for equilibrium problems. We'll especially focus on ways to solve for equilibrium concentrations when you're given initial concentrations of reactants and products. Well, it's the end of the day. I finished with all my classes. It was a pretty good day, very busy day. What I really want to talk about with you guys is how I use do-nows in the classroom. When I first started teaching, and I've talked about this on my channel before, I read Harry Wong's The First Days of School. It was a book that was recommended to me, and it was actually given to me at my first teaching job. And so I've really internalized a lot of what he said. And one of the ways that he said to promote success in your class is to make sure that you have really solid procedures in your class. And one of those things was to incorporate the use of a bell ringer. So a bell ringer, a do now, they both mean the same thing, but basically the idea is that it's an assignment that your students will do as soon as they come into the classroom. And so for me, for many years, a bell ringer or a do now was actually physically a piece of paper that the students would pick up and would start working on. But as you can imagine, as the years go on, that's an awful lot of paper for every single kid. So then I started doing do-nows that were like half sheets. So I would try to condense them more to half sheets so I could just kind of cut them in half. And so now that I'm more experienced, there are days that I don't even do a, particular handout. Maybe it's digital. So maybe we'll play a game or something like that. I use do-nows all different ways in my class, but there are 5 ways that I've kind of narrowed down that I use pretty successfully every single month. I don't necessarily use them all every single week, but definitely every single month. Now, obviously, the first way to use a do now assignment of some kind is to very simply just review content that you've taught the day prior. And so for me, I used my boiling points and melting points of the halogens do now during my intermolecular forces unit. We talk about London dispersion forces, and I asked them to analyze some data. I always like them to use graphs in order to explain these different trends and come up with reasons why we see the trends that we do. And so for our purposes, this particular do now is focusing on why is it as you go down the group, we're going to expect to see chlorine and fluorine as gases, bromine as a liquid, and iodine as a solid. And so usually when the students come in and they're doing this in the classroom, they come in, they pick up the actual handout, they sit down and they start working on it. And they can of course work on it with other members of their learning team. They can interact with me and ask questions. But the overall idea is that you're maximizing the time that you're using in class so that your students are getting some cognitive engagement right from the get-go and they're getting ready and warmed up to start the day's lesson. Another way that I love to use do now time, this is probably one of my more favorite ways, is to use do now time to introduce a brand new concept or skill. And so in this unit, we are in intermolecular forces right now, and I wanted to introduce dissociation equations by using a model. So this is almost similar to a little POGIL activity. If you're familiar with process-oriented guided inquiry learning, it's almost like a real quick POGIL activity where the students have a model and they have to derive meaning from the model. And so in this example, the students are looking at dissociation equations, in particular calcium chloride. And you can see that they have a worked out dissociation equation, and then they've got some questions that accompany what all the symbols mean. And then of course, using that model, then they can write out the dissociation equations for all of these ionic compounds. What I really like so much about this one is, besides spending time talking about the dissociation equation itself, it also provides the students the ability to focus on the intermolecular forces that are changing during this time. And so what I do too in my class is I have these like little cups of water that have some water molecules in them. You probably have seen them, they're from 3D molecular designs. They're very cool. And so I put out the cups of water for the students to play with, and then they obviously have the water, and then they have the ions, and I ask them to describe what's happening to the intermolecular forces during this time. This serves as a kind of segue into how can we model the interaction? How can we actually model what's happening on the particle level whenever we're trying to dissolve something? So besides using the do now to teach about dissociation equations, I'm also able to use this do now to branch off and talk about modeling as well. In a lot of ways, whenever I'm trying to introduce a new concept, this is the lesson for the day. So whenever I'm introducing a new concept or skill, the do now actually kind of serves as the quote lesson, and then the students will go off and practice that information. Another way that I really enjoy using do now time is for social emotional learning. So for me, being connected to my kids is really important, and I definitely feel like being virtual last year has amplified the importance of building relationships with students. And so for me, I like to start off like maybe a Monday with a kind of social emotional learning task like this. So for example, I ask them like, what did you do over the weekend? And then I'll take this, I create these in Google Slides, and then I take it and I put it inside a Jamboard, and then the students can go ahead and create a Post-it note in the Jamboard and kind of click and drag their Post-it note to their respective column. So this is a great way for the students to talk about what they did over the weekend, kind of give me some insight as far as what's going on in their lives, and of course, just give them a chance to just kind of relax and chat with friends. I mean, that's really an important part of, I think, being a high school student, especially building those interpersonal skills. So I want to allow them the environment to do just that. Another way that I love to use do now time with my AP students specifically is actually for test prep. And I know it's not the most exciting thing, but they are going to be taking the exam in May, so I want to make them feel prepared. So what I do is I'll take like an AP style question set, like maybe like a multiple choice or something like that, and I'll put it inside a quizzes, or you can also do this with Blookit, which the students really like Blookit. So it kind of helps to gamify things and keep it interesting, and so they try to like, obviously beat each other, so the competition is really a lot of fun. So I really like using this for kind of some sort of test prep. And the last way that I use do nows and do now time in my classroom is using do now quizzes. And so for me, I have a flipped classroom. I spend a lot of time creating video content for my kids, especially my AP students and my CP students. With my CP students, I will give them a video in Edpuzzle. It'll ask them some questions. I'll require them to take notes, and then when they come in, I'll actually expect them to take a one-question quiz. So the one-question quiz is pretty much right from the notes. It's very easy. It's really not that difficult. As long as the students did the assignment, it should be an easy A for them. And then in some cases, if I'm asking them to apply what they've learned, I'll even let them use their notes on the quiz. So they also have that kind of added comfort of knowing like, if you did what you were supposed to do, you're gonna do fine on this quiz. So a do now quiz is a great way to hold your students accountable to make sure that they learned what they should have learned from the Edpuzzle or the video assignment that you gave your kids the night before. So those are the 5 major ways that I use do nows in my classroom as of right now. I'm sure there are like tons of other ways. I'd love to know, how do you use do now time, or do you even use any kind of bell work or do nows with your kids? If you do or don't, I'd love to know about it. Please leave a comment down below. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will definitely check in with you all next week.